You're listening to the Sent Ones podcast, where we help disciples of Jesus discover their calling, develop their skills, and get deployed to their mission.
All right. Well, we are excited to be back. It's back for us. Always a funny way to start podcasts, but I'm really pumped just getting these guys in the same virtual room. Josh, of course, who you've heard a lot on this podcast, and then our friend Puck is joining us. We just connected that all of us now, maybe a decade ago for you guys, and I a couple years later, close to it, just a simple gospel sharing tool was instrumental in helping us all get started and sharing our faith, following the call to reach people around us and then beyond. So it was kind of a fun connection. But Puck, I just want to give you a 30-second minute to kind of introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, what you're doing, and then we'll get into this conversation.
Yeah, great to be with you guys. Always a joy. So I'm Puck, and me and my family of 6. We're currently stateside. We're from North Carolina, visiting with some family now, but over the years have done campus ministry for 10, 12 years. Following that, we did some church planting work in urban areas. And then we're now currently serving the Lord in Central Asia in a mega city. So the Lord has just led us from one thing to the next, but we just kind of keep doing the same thing wherever we are for the most part.
Yeah. That's awesome, Puck. It's so good to have you here. We were talking offline just about how what Feeney just mentioned, how you and I met on Zoom with a friend of ours, Troy, and you were stateside in North Carolina. I was in South Asia. I think Troy was still in Florida at that time, and he was training us on this little thing called the 411, and it's crazy how different. I mean, we're all in different parts of the world now, right? After that. And so, but I kind of do want to start there, brother, because one thing that we're talking a lot about on this podcast is really discovering your calling and what it looks like to live a life of a sent one, right? And so I'd love to try to unpack your journey a little bit of how you got started locally, how that then led you to more of a regional call and how you shifted to answer that call. And now on a global level, what that looks like. It's kind of that Acts chapter 1 idea just of hitting Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth, what that practically looks like. And so why don't you unpack that for us, man? How did you get started in kind of living that sent life locally in North Carolina? What were you up to? How did you hear that call? And then how did that lead you then regionally and globally, if you want to unpack that for us?
Yeah, it's certainly a long story because it's just how God has led us through our lives. But the basic idea is I had already been called by the Lord to serve him. You know, it was a encounter with him as a college student when I came to faith, even having been raised in a Christian family. And so the doors that I felt I needed to say yes to, that were kind of the singular opportunity doors, led me into campus ministry, where my life was transformed. I was really passionate about passing that along to other college students like me. But for quite a few years, I was serving in this collegiate environment in a couple of different contexts, but felt like I was running programs to keep the programs running. You know, the intent was that disciples would be made, but we weren't really seeing a lot of fruit from that, and also felt like there was a disconnect that it doesn't seem like what we're doing with our A plus B sort of programs is going to it's going to result in disciples being made. And so I was just looking for answers wherever I could find them. I was looking at different books, anybody that had some kind of cool vision or anything they'd been seeing that was noteworthy in terms of kind of kingdom advanced disciple making. I was on it, but I was drinking from like all these different wells. When all of a sudden connected with Troy, all of our mutual friend, he's been a mentor for quite a few years now. He just asked some questions, offered a few pieces of advice, gave me some simple tools to get started. That same thing that we all ended up kind of connecting on, just some simple disciple making training. And it gave us a place to start. And we started seeing, man, we can actually see disciples made. That's really where it started. But then I encountered in that process vision for no place left, or for all peoples, in every place. This biblical vision that everyone should hear, and that God's heart is that everyone does hear. And that started to take root. in my heart. It started to take root in our work. And then it started to have an impact on the trajectory we had in our campus work. We started looking around going, well, what things are we doing here on campus that will help us pursue this vision of making disciples who make disciples until everyone's heard, of equipping disciples to reach their friends, family, and neighbors and whoever's around them. And what's keeping us from doing that? And then we started, rather aggressively chopping off things that were keeping us from doing that. And so little by little, it progressed, matured more and more on our campus. It never got wildly out of control, but we started to go from no one's ever sharing the gospel to everyone's regularly sharing the gospel. People were coming to faith and being baptized. We saw, a couple of churches here and there start on the campus. We were really encouraged, but as I was in the midst of this, it really felt like this whole band of leaders that were growing around me no longer really needed me to be there. In fact, I was kind of getting in the way of their growth and progression and their ownership of the work. And at the same time, as I started to look around and see all these, increasing numbers of campus leaders, both, a couple of older staff people like myself, as well as, just young students themselves, my heart started to be burdened for, well, where are people not hearing? Like, it sure feels like things are starting to happen here. Always plenty more work to be done. But then I started kind of looking around, was asking some mentors for some advice on, well, I don't know that I see myself doing this kind of work in this small college town forever, and I think, the question I was asked was, do you feel like you're more called to making and multiplying disciples in churches, or to doing work in a collegiate context, or to doing that kind of work in a collegiate context? And I really felt like, man, I thought I was a collegiate guy. Turns out this is what I've been called to.
Man, that's awesome. And we want to continue with that story. I wanted to ask one question that it really hit me when you said we had to look at what we were doing, but also what we needed to stop doing.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered if you could just, for anybody that finds himself in that place, the other thing I wrote down is running programs to keep the programs running. If somebody right now is finding themselves in that space, maybe it's just by way of a story or example, or like, what did that practically look like to like, oh, these things are not making disciples. There's a gut check probably for the honest disciple, but if you just got anything there of what that looked like in that kind of local context when you made some of those shifts.
Sure, we were doing a lot of the sort of traditional shell of campus ministry, and even very similar to kind of church life in a standard setting. There was nothing that felt like, wow, we're just, how could we keep this thing running? This is terrible. There was nothing that felt like egregiously out of line, honestly. But as we looked around, I remember having a conversation with a key student leader at the time. He was involved in worship ministry stuff, and he was involved at his local church on some Sunday morning stuff, as well as with the youth group and with our campus ministry. And so he was kind of this perfect example of what we hoped in our campus ministry sort of mindset would be developed. Guy who's serving in a local church, he's serving in on the ministry and campus and things like that. But as I'm sharing about making disciples, going and sharing the gospel with people, being able to follow up with, reading the word with people who are interested, he was like, man, honestly don't have time. I've got my major, I've got, this job at the church, I've got this thing and that thing. And he started to tell me, he listed every single day of the week almost as busy with responsibilities for all of these hats he was wearing. I thought, man, our success in trying to get people into roles like that is keeping him from being able to have the time and energy to share good news with people and follow up what God does with that. So that really hit me hard. And then I just remember how much time and energy we would put into our weekly worship gathering. We'd have meetings to plan it, multiple meetings to plan it. We would have all of the hours leading up, setting up, preparing, working through it. I was working through my message development stuff, to teach every week, so on and so forth. And so all these hours were being in it, sucked into it. And I just remember one specific night kind of sitting ready for the service to start, but it wasn't ready to go quite yet, in the back hallway, just kind of sitting on a little desk, 5 minutes to go, thinking, this isn't working. It's not, this is fine, but it's not working. It's not producing anything that I'm seeing in people's lives. And so less and less students were involved over the years. I was seeing less and less commitment to sort of Jesus and his call on their whole lives. And it felt like it was all in spite of a lot of effort that we were putting out. And it was just really a discouraging season, to be honest. And I didn't feel like there was any recourse. That was what was leading to those questions. So we started looking at that and thinking, man, we're not such a huge ministry group that we need a big gathering. We don't have this sort of ultra cool ethos or, a ton of staff to keep everything running. So then little by little, we started saying, let's stop doing this. Let's stop doing that. Let's just focus on something that's simple, repeatable, and start casting vision and trying to do whatever we can that will directly one for one track with pursuing that vision.
That's great, Puck. Yeah. I mean, honestly, man, one thing that you just said there, about one of the guys on your team that, really didn't have time to be sharing the gospel or making disciples. I mean, if you're out there listening right now and you find yourself so packed full of stuff that you don't have time to do the main stuff that Jesus has called you to, there may be an issue. And so if you don't have time to make disciples or share the gospel, which is really the core missionary task of what we're called to do, it's really who we are as disciples of Jesus. It's a major component of who we are. If you don't have time to abide and spend time with Jesus alone, if you're not having time to actually make disciples and share the gospel, then you may want to think about reorganizing your calendar so that it's simple, like Puck just said, simple, reproducible, something that's with a big vision that you're able to really focus on, and it's going to help you to really make a great impact. And so, Puck, let me shift us from here, bro. So you were at this, college ministry, campus ministry in North Carolina. What began to kind of lift your eyes to different parts of the U.S. at that point in your life? What was it that kind of, you began to realize that, hey, maybe the Lord is leading me to go ahead and move on from this place?
Yeah, at first, I had no thought about anything other than my local context. It was just the college campus, and even beyond that, the greatest extent it stretched to was maybe other college campuses in our region could be, places that we connect. We start something on this campus or that campus in our sort of mountain region of the South where we were. But it was really the guy who trained me started inviting me to a couple of key events here and there. It was maybe twice a year, something like that, where he said, hey, would you come with me? It initially started with a couple of online training kind of things, getting some practice, showing somebody else the thing that I've just been learning and utilizing locally. And as I was doing that, helping another leader that we had no connection with, that will be, that was a critical moment of seeing, I'm not just here to serve on my campus. I'm here to be a conduit to whoever I can give this away to, wherever they are, regardless of whether they have the same target in mind. Then a couple of invitations to go to some bigger, longer training in another, in another context where I was gathered with other like-minded people, seeing and hearing, seeing how they're pursuing Jesus and his mission, how they're interacting with one another, what they're learning from the word, their posture towards letting the word drive and guide everything that they're doing. That was revelatory, honestly. And I felt like, I don't know who these people are, but these feel like my people, and I want to be like these people in their pursuit of Jesus and his mission. So that was huge for me. And it put me in places that I had never thought about before, amongst people talking about targets I had never really thought about before. And it just sort of expanded my vision. Like, I see what it is I'm reaching for as I'm thinking, well, our campus has something sustainable going on right now. Maybe the next campus could have something. And then I started thinking, actually, wait, no, you mean there's millions of lost people in some of these other cities, even here in North America. And there are opportunities to come alongside people saying, I live in one of those places. I'd love some help, some encouragement and some partnership in that. And it just felt like a gift to me to be able to jump in and serve somebody else and walk along with them. So little by little, that started to broaden my perspective and horizon of view. And yeah, then the Lord was speaking through that process for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you, Puck. I mean, honestly, bro, what you've just said, I think is so key for so many out there that are going to be listening. Like if you feel this kind of apostolic call in your heart, if you feel that what you're currently doing isn't all that God's called you into, it's really important to get yourself around other people who are sent ones, other people who are living a sent life, other people who are living out that apostolic call. Because it's so often that most of this stuff is caught rather than it's taught. It's when you rub shoulders with people like that it kind of raises the bar of what you're doing in your own life and what you feel called to do in your own life. And so I want to encourage you guys out there listening, just like Puck just said, man, if there's other people out there that you can get in touch with, where you can start to just get around them, do ministry with them, go out into the harvest with them, do trainings with them. If you don't know of anyone like that, friends, please reach out to us. We've got a network all over North America where we'd be glad to connect you with other sent ones that are living this type of life. And we would love to help connect you so that you can really get into the trenches and really experience that. Because Puck, honestly, I mean, that it seems like it was through those encounters that you were having that really led you fully into the calling that God had in your life. Would you say that's accurate?
Absolutely. I think it was two things for me. One was I had leadership from our sort of board within our campus organization at the time, and then the pastor of the church that I was a part of in our local community that created a lane for me to just operate and see this is a gifting and a calling that you have and that you should be free to operate in. That gave me room and gave me license to be able to just, I mean that in the sense of I didn't have to look over my shoulder or quit something and walk away from something. I could just do what I was doing in the context I was in. And then, like you said, Josh, that invitation into other places was
Yeah.
critical and giving God a context by which he could speak even more clearly to me, and I could hear it and understand it and see it in this sort of tangible way. So that was what finally took it to the next level for me, for sure.
That's great, man. Yeah. So now fast forward ahead a little bit. I know after North Carolina, if I'm not mistaken, you shifted to California for a season. Is that right?
Hmm. Yeah, right.
And so what did that transition look like? What were you involved in at that point? And then what ultimately led you to the nations to Central Asia?
Yeah, good question. I mean, really, along the way, it feels like I've got a step or two in front of me I can see, but then not much farther beyond it. There was never a grand master plan in my
Yeah.
mind. There was never a kind of target that was the next step. It just it started with what do I have in front of me and what do I do next. And as Troy had invited me into some of these trainings, particularly, it was building this like building step by step a clearer vision of what the next season could look like. And so I went to him one day and asked, I had been given an offer. This was the catalytic point for me. I had been given an offer to come serve in a major city in the US, completely unrelated to the relationships and it was like come do campus ministry with me in this big city, big diverse place. And I thought, oh, this sounds great. This is it. But I talked to Troy as a mentor figure in my life, just asking for advice. Hey, I'm resonating more and more with this idea of, apostolic work, being a sent one, catalyzing new things, so on and so forth. And I'm feeling like this college campus isn't going to be where I do it forever. I've got this offer to come serve in another city with this guy. He just asked me some good questions like a coach does. Well, what would be different? What would be the same? What do you think you would gain? And just really helped me work through it more clearly. And I came to the realization on my own through that actually it would just be more of the same thing. And so I was asking him, well, where would someone go? How would someone pursue this calling? Like I had no sense of what can I do with this? And he said, well, I mean, if you're feeling, the city actually that I was called to, was being invited to was another city in California, but it wasn't LA. And he said, I hear you saying you're maybe called to California. You've got some heart for that. Turns out we haven't told anybody, but the Lord's been calling our family to California. Maybe you could consider teaming with us. We've been working together for a while. And I thought, wow, he would want me to work with him, and it just felt like, oh, I belong in this to some degree. That felt like a revelation that I was allowed to do that. I would be, a valuable piece to anything. And then we just continued to talk with some mentors about how to pick a location. It's like we knew it needed to be a place where we could do, multiplying of disciples and churches. And we knew we needed to have a similar vision together. And it just seemed like, if not with a team that we already know and can work well together with in a place of great need with a direct invitation, then what, and when? And it just seemed like the Lord was continuing to confirm that as we talked with our local leaders and our leadership that we were, serving underneath in our current context at the time. And then God just kept saying yes, and we pressed on into it, and that's how we made the shift into that season.
That's great, Puck. Yeah, honestly, I heard two big things there that I really want to unpack for our listeners before we move on. And then, Feeney, if you've got a question or anything or follow up there. But the first thing that I love that you said at the very beginning here, Puck, is you said basically you never saw some grand master plan 50 steps ahead. It was one or two steps at a time. And I love the simplicity there, Puck, because I think so often, especially those that are called to be a sent one with that apostolic life, we're all kind of big vision kind of people, and we almost want the whole thing ahead, like every step ahead to be lit up and magnified before we take any steps. And the truth is, I think the key of your journey, Puck, is just being obedient to those one or two steps that you saw in front of you. And so, guys, if you're listening out there, like literally, God is going to take you step by step through this process, and He wants to know that He can trust you. Like He wants to know that you're going to follow and that you're going to obey. And He cares way more about the journey and the relationship with you than He does about giving you the next 10 years of your life planned out for you. He wants to know that you're going to walk with Him, you're going to hear His voice, you're going to learn to listen to Him and obey, that you're willing to sacrifice, that you're willing to step out of your comfort zone. And that journey is so important to living the sent life, to be a sent one. And so I want to encourage you, just man, continue to take those steps to faithfulness, because that's how God sees that He can trust you. And it's how you learn to hear His voice every day of your life. And you learn to be guided by Him and really be led by the Holy Spirit in your life. And so, Puck, thank you for that, bro. That's so encouraging. I think the other piece here that is huge is that, you mentioned Troy literally inviting you to come be with them and be a part of their team in California, which is beautiful. And if you're more of a mature sent one out there, I want to encourage you, like, give invitations to people, invite people to come live with you, invite people to come be with you, invite people to come and make disciples with you, show them what it looks like. I mean, like Paul, get your Timothys and Tituses and get those people around you so that you're living this out, so that you're reproducing yourself and other people. And I love, Puck, that you were willing to basically say, hey, Lord, like here we are. We know you're calling us to different places. And it just merged perfectly with a more seasoned apostle who invited you to be a part of their team, which is a beautiful thing. And so I want to encourage those more seasoned apostles out there and sent ones out there, like, don't shy away from giving big asks to people, right? Like, don't shy away from inviting people to be a part of what you're doing. You never know what's going to happen and what the impact it's going to make in their lives. And so, Feeney, I'll pass it to you, bro. If you've got any, questions or any next areas you want to take this, bro.
Yeah, I love even what you were saying. I'm just kind of noting like where this lines up with what we read in Scripture. Josh and I recorded a conversation a little bit ago and published it about that second missionary journey where we read the end of it, but in the middle of it, Paul's like, hey, we can't go this place. Hey, we can't go this place. Like just one or two steps is so key. And Paul models what you just said there, Josh, of inviting people along. So those are such good. It's awesome when we see those line up. I wanted to ask it this way, Puck, for the next thing is like, surely there was a lot of lost people in California. Like how does that calling work out to go, I'm doing my best to impact lostness here, but there's also lostness in Central Asia or in a lot of places. Like, I just would be curious for you, or maybe obviously your wife and your family, how did that work out where we're like, the call is even to more lostness, but like, oh man, there's all this lostness here. We'd just love to know how kind of God worked that in you for that next step as you went to, we would say maybe a global target or to an unreached area.
Yeah, great question. And you know, the funny side note is that just about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, my wife and I were back in our mountain town for celebrating our anniversary. We met at this school. We went, university there. We lived there for a good number of years, had our first couple of kids there. And we were walking around on the campus and in the community. And man, I could see more lostness than I've seen in a while there. So there's still quite a bit to do in a place like that. And then LA, coming from North Carolina to LA was, it was intimidating. It was a really intimidating move because of how big the city was, how extensive the lostness was, the diversity and the challenges of urban life and things like that. And it's not like we finished, if that's what you mean, in terms of, is there still a lot of lostness? Bad news, there is, and there's still a ton of work to be done. But what was really kind of formative for me in that season of work was I didn't really have a context or a mental concept, so to speak, of how this looks when you pop into a place like that. And what I saw and experienced was through some of the training I had gone with Troy to help do over a couple of years there, before we all moved, we had 5 people, 5 different areas, each saying, we want to do this locally. We're committed to it. Will you come and help train us and help us get this rolling? That was huge because when we got there, we had a few people asking for ongoing help. And so we weren't in a place where it was just 0 to 1. And that was all there was there. We had people who were already rooted in the community, already had a vision from the Lord, and wanted to help mobilize more and more people into that. And so our role was really focused on training, equipping, and coaching as our primary bread and butter there. And then, of course, as we're carrying on with them, we're helping coach them in disciple making. We're doing our own, we're doing our disciplines in the sense of sharing as we go, sharing with our neighbors and in whatever part of the community we're in, or in particular pockets of lostness, things like that. But it really helped me see our goal isn't personally to get there and share the gospel with everyone. And I didn't feel like my specific calling and burden was, I'm going to be buried in this place, one day after many, many years, and we're just going to share with as many people personally as we can. That is a part of what we did, but it wasn't our defining characteristic of our calling, so to speak. And instead, it became much more about serving leaders and things like that. So even this weekend, I'll be making a trip back out there to go visit people that we've helped start churches in their homes. And I've heard stories of how these churches have established, how they have reproduced, how they're continuing to make disciples. They've got new leaders that I don't know yet that I'll get to meet and interact with. And there are more people carrying on in the place that we were kind of standing in. And really part of our being called there was to fill a gap of need to serve the local leaders that were asking for help. And part of our exit was creating space for more people to take more ownership. That happened in North Carolina. We can look back now, almost 3 years later, and see how that's happened in California as well. And then again, lostness could be a bit of a bait, in terms of sent ones feeling stirred up for something important and meaningful, God speaking his calling into their lives in a particular place. He does all sorts of different things in order to get our attention, grab our hearts, and move our bodies to new places. But for me, with each progressive calling into a new place, one thing that has shifted is my desire to be there for a while, but then get hungry to go somewhere else has diminished a bit. Like I'm no longer like wanderlusty and like wanting to find the next great place. I'm working really hard to learn the language of the local culture there because it's kind of critical to being able to do the work that we're doing in Central Asia. And it's hard. And I'm just starting to get my hands into it well. And the idea of going somewhere else is not appealing at all to me. So I've gone from dreaming in my small town of all the wonderful places I could go and serve the Lord to then only being willing to go somewhere if the Lord is very clear in telling me where he wants me to be, and not going or getting antsy and itchy to go to those places beforehand. So at this point, we just keep saying, man, I hope the Lord has us here for a long time. Our heart is here amongst these people, in this place because of the need there and the heart he's kind of put in us for them, our affection for them. But we're trusting that, he's working out what he wants to work out in whatever time scale he has for us there.
Yeah, that's so good. So good, Puck. Well, man, we're gonna have to wrap up. We're getting close to our time here, but this story is so inspiring, brother, and I hope it inspires so many listeners out there. I usually at the end here, Puck, I want to take a couple minutes and just kind of unpack a few of the pieces of your journey, just so that we can kind of succinctly talk about it with our listeners. But as you were talking about your time in North Carolina and then going to California and then eventually now to Central Asia, I want to unpack a few things that really stood out to me, so that we can really have our listeners begin to pray through these things and really try to put rubber to the road so that it becomes as practical as possible for them. But what I loved at the very beginning of Puck's story, guys, when you were listening, he just started doing something for the kingdom. Whatever he was able to do in that season of his life, he began, for example, in the college ministry, in the campus ministry. And I want to encourage you that if you're feeling called into any sort of ministry, it's important to just start doing something for the kingdom, whatever you can, because it's in those places where God is going to use you. It's those places that God is going to shape you, shape your character, shape your heart, pull out your giftings, pull out your calling. And it's from those places that God is going to then guide you to the new places he might have for you. And what I saw next, Puck, in your story is that as you were doing more of the traditional side of ministry, there was this holy discontentedness in your heart, a good discontentedness, because you longed to see more kingdom impact. You wanted to see God do greater things. You knew that God longed to do greater things. And that led you to a deep hunger to try to research and read and study as much as you could on how can we make a greater impact for the kingdom, which is what eventually led you to multiplication and movement type ministry, which I think is incredible. You see, what ends up happening, guys, is that when we begin to have this holy discontentedness in our heart, it's honestly a mark of the apostolic and prophetic and evangelistic type of giftings. When we begin to see, we know God's heart is for something greater. We know his vision is huge. We know his heart for the nations is massive. And what we're currently seeing isn't quite what we know God longs to see. And so that discontentedness leads us to faithful obedience, to try to see the best ability or the best possible impact in a region or in a city as we possibly can. And so it leads us to do things that other people aren't doing. It leads us to try things that other people aren't trying. And that ends up it led Puck to really begin to labor locally in order to see multiplication and disciple making happen. And so he began to prioritize, guys, disciple making, sharing the gospel, simple tools, reproducible things that everybody can do. He began to live that out, train other people on how to do that. So that way local impact was really happening in an incredible way on their campus. And here's a key here, guys, that I want you to hear in Puck's story. As you work locally, Okay. And as you labor locally to live this sent life, to be a sent one, God may call you to stay and he may call you to go. But the key is obedience. The key is listening to the Spirit and going wherever he calls you to go. And that's what we just heard Puck say there at the end, guys, is that he hopes that he stays in Central Asia a long time, but they're open to wherever God calls and wherever he is clear, that's what they're going to do. And so as you live this sent life, friends, locally, God may call you to stay there for a long period of time and labor and make as many disciples as possible and saturate a region with the gospel. I mean, if that's what he's calling you to, man, throw your life into it and give all that you can to reach as many lost people as possible and to make as many disciples as possible and multiply the impact to the best of your ability. And his Spirit is going to meet you in those places, friends. This is what God longs to do. He longs to raise up men and women that will reach his lost sons and daughters with the gospel. And so after that, that's when Puck really began to sense a regional call. He went from his Jerusalem to the Judea and Samaria to California. He began to work in the same way in there, reaching lost people, making disciples, going after it. One key thing there that when he left that I noticed was that he worked himself out of a job. He needed to make space for local leadership in order to take more ownership. And so if you find yourself in a place where it's like, well, I'm not as needed here anymore as I once was, maybe it's time to go. Maybe it's time to move on. That's exactly where we get the no place left vision, right? Paul literally was able to say there was no place left for his work in Asia, so he was going to go to Rome on his way to Spain. And so when we find ourselves in a place where, hey, maybe we're not needed as much in the day to day, maybe even though there's still work to be done, there's great local ownership, there's great local leadership, maybe it's time to move on. And that can be a sign for you, friends, that it may be time to go ahead and move on into a different place, which is what led Puck to California and then eventually all the way to Central Asia in order to impact lostness. But I think the key to the sent life, friends, to being a sent one is this, okay? We are sent locally, regionally, and globally. It's all three of those things. It wasn't Jerusalem and then Judea and then Samaria and then to the ends of the earth. It was all of those simultaneously. We are called to impact as many people as possible, no matter where we find ourselves. And so I want to encourage you, wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, wherever the Lord has you in this season, guys, do everything that you can to reach as many lost people as possible, to make as many disciples as you can, and to multiply impact for the sake of the kingdom. That's what the sent life is all about. And Puck, thank you so much, brother, for living this out in such a beautiful way, for sharing your testimony, because the path that you led, brother, and the path that you were on is going to help so many people realize that if they just start where they're at, God will continue to lift their eyes onto the next horizon. He'll continue to put one or two steps ahead. And as long as we're faithful and obedient in that, we are going to end up exactly where God has us every step of the way, because his will is the best place for us. And so wherever he wants us, wherever he calls us to be, that's really what it means to live this sent life, friends, and to be a sent one. So thank you, Puck, for being a sent one, bro, and for living this out and for sharing your story. It's really an honor, man, and it was so good to have you.
Glad to serve the Lord with you guys.
Yeah, so just want to encourage, if you need some ongoing kind of drip to be reminded of these things, check us out on some of the socials, Instagram and Facebook, Sent Ones Missions on Instagram and just Sent Ones on Facebook. I'd really encourage you to check those out. And as I was reflecting on some of what Josh was saying, I kind of wanted to give Puck the opportunity to kind of close us as you think about maybe maybe think about yourself 5 years ago, 10 years ago, like what would you give as like an ending advice to somebody that's just starting to discover their calling of what God's put in their life?
I think the more someone just takes a step into what it is that God's heart is focused on, what he's calling them into, like that step of obedience to get started is often a watershed moment for God to continue doing more things, speaking more clearly. And yeah, I heard his voice more clearly. I felt closer to him and more aligned with his heart after I had taken some of those first steps of obedience uh, to get over the difficulty, and the discomfort at times of trying to share good news about Jesus with people. And I felt like, I've been missing something. That it just came as like this, like lightning bolt almost. So just encourage people, take that next step of faithfulness to whatever it looks like for you in your context to start sharing with the people all around you.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to the Sent Ones podcast. For practical next steps or more content like this, check us out at sentones.com, or you can subscribe with your favorite podcast provider. Hope to see you guys next time.